Most people have been taught to think about value the wrong way. They believe the goal is to become exceptional at one thing, one skill, one profession, one specialty, one lane. And for a long time, that approach worked. If you became highly skilled accountant, mechanic, engineer, salesperson, teacher, technician, or manager, you could build an entire career around that capability. But something important has changed. Today, information is abundant. Knowledge is abundant. Tools are abundant. Artificial intelligence is becoming more capable every year. And because access is becoming universal, something interesting is happening. The people creating the most value are not always the people who know the most. They are not always the people with the highest IQ. They're not always the people with the most credentials. Very often, they are people who can combine multiple capabilities together. A person who can communicate and solve problems. A person who can learn and execute. A person who can adapt and lead. A person who can understand systems and explain them clearly. Those combinations create leverage, and leverage creates value. The future is increasingly rewarding people who can integrate capabilities instead of relying on a single strength, because a single strength and single skill can become obsolete. A single industry can change. A single technology can evolve. But a person who possesses multiple reinforcing capabilities can continue to adapt. They can continue to create value. They can continue to find opportunities. And that is why understanding a skill stack may be one of the most important advantages available in the post-scarcity era. Because future belongs less to isolated talent and more to integrated capability. Most people spend years trying to become better at one thing, and there's nothing wrong with becoming highly skilled. The problem begins when people assume that that one skill alone will carry them indefinitely, because the world rarely stays still. Industries evolve, markets change, technology advances, customers' expectations shift, entire professions transform. And when that happens, people who depend on entirely one capability often find themselves struggling to adapt. Think about how many industries have changed in the last 20 years. Think about how many jobs now require technology that did not exist when previous generations entered the workforce. Think about how many tools that have appeared, matured, and replaced older methods. The lesson is not that expertise is unimportant. The lesson is that adaptability is increasingly important. And adaptability comes from capacity and diversity, not capability dependence. A person with one skill often has one path. A person with multiple complementary skills has options. They can pivot. They can adjust. They can learn. They can reinvent themselves when necessary. That flexibility creates resilience, and resilience becomes more valuable every year. The future does not reward rigidity, it rewards adaptation. And skill stacking is ultimately a system for creating adaptation. Instead of building your identity around one capability, you build your identity around your ability to continue developing capabilities. That shift changes everything. One of the biggest misunderstandings about success is the belief that you must become world-class at something. And while exceptional talent certainly exists, most valuable people are not valuable because they are the best in the world at one thing. They are valuable because they combine multiple abilities together. Think about a business owner. He may not be the world's greatest salesperson. He may not be the world's greatest manager. He may not even be the world's greatest marketer. But if they are reasonably good at all three, they can create enormous value. The same principle applies everywhere. A technician who can communicate, a teacher who can lead, a creator who understands business, a manager who can solve problems, a programmer who understands people. These combinations create opportunities that individual skills often cannot. And this is important because many people spend years trying to become exceptional while ignoring complementary capabilities that would immediately make them more effective. You see, the goal is not perfection. The goal is leverage. The goal is creating combinations of abilities that reinforce one another. Because skills rarely operate independently, they interact. And when they interact effectively, the results become much larger than the individual parts. That's the foundation of skill stacking. Not becoming the best, becoming increasingly capable. For this episode, I want to focus on 5 capabilities that repeatedly appear in highly effective people. Communication, learning, problem solving, emotional regulation, and execution. Notice that none of these belong to a specific profession. They work almost everywhere. In business, in careers, in relationships, in leadership, in personal development. A person who communicates clearly gains influence. A person who learns quickly adapts faster. A person who solves problems becomes useful. A person who regulates emotions remains stable under pressure. A person who executes consistently produces results. And what makes these capabilities powerful is that they strengthen one another. Better communication improves leadership. Better learning improves problem solving. Better emotional regulation improves execution. Better execution creates more opportunities to learn. The system compounds, and that is what many people miss. The objective is not to build one extraordinary skill. The objective is to build a collection of capabilities that becomes stronger together than they would ever be alone. That is what makes someone difficult to replace, not because they know everything, but because they can continue growing regardless of circumstances. Many people underestimate communication because they assume communication is simply talking. It is not. Communication is the ability to transfer ideas clearly, and that ability affects almost every area of life. Your relationships, leadership, business, sales, teaching, negotiation, teamwork, even personal development. Think about how many opportunities depend on another person understanding what you are trying to communicate. You may have a great idea, but if you cannot explain it, the idea often goes nowhere. You may have a solution to a problem, but if you cannot communicate that solution effectively, it may never be implemented. You may have valuable knowledge, but if you cannot teach it, persuade others, or share it clearly, much of that value remains hidden. That is why communication acts as a multiplier. It increases the effectiveness of everything else you know. And for many people, communication is actually the bottleneck. Not intelligence, not talent, not opportunity. Communication. They know more than they can express. They understand more than they can explain. They see possibilities that they cannot effectively communicate to others. And that limitation quietly affects their results. So ask yourself a difficult question. Have opportunities passed you by because you struggle to communicate your value? Have people misunderstood your intentions? Have your ideas remained stuck in your head instead of becoming reality? If so, communication may be the weakest part of your current skill stack. And if that's the case, that's actually good news, because communication is a learnable skill. Every improvement in communication improves the effectiveness of everything else you already know. That is why communication does not simply add value, it multiplies value. The modern world changes quickly. Technology changes, markets change, industries change, tools change, information changes. And because change continues to accelerate, something important is happening. The people who thrive are not often the people who know the most. They are the people who learn the fastest. There's a major difference between knowledge and learning. Knowledge is what you already know. Learning is your ability to acquire new capabilities. And in a rapidly changing environment, learning often becomes more valuable than existing knowledge. Think about it. A person who knows one thing may succeed for a period of time. A person who can continually learn can succeed repeatedly. That is because they can adapt. They can evolve. They can adjust to changing conditions. And this is where many people accidentally confuse learning with consumption. They watch videos. They read articles. They listen to podcasts. They consume information constantly. But very little changes, because information only becomes learning when behavior changes. Learning requires application. It requires testing, experimentation, correction, and repetition. And that is why some people can spend years consuming information while making very little progress. Meanwhile, somebody else can learn one useful idea and immediately apply it. The second person often grows faster, not because they consume more. It is because they implement more. So ask yourself another question. When you encounter new information, do you apply it, or do you simply consume it? Because if knowledge enters your mind but never changes your behavior, your learning capability may be weaker than you realize. And in a world changing this quickly, strengthening your ability to learn may become one of the most valuable investments you can make. There is a reason execution belongs in your skill stack, because execution has a way of exposing reality. Many people believe that they have a knowledge problem. They think they need another book, another course, another video, another system. But often the problem is not a lack of knowledge. The problem is a lack of execution. Because execution forces ideas into the real world, and the real world gives feedback. You quickly discover what works, what doesn't work, what needs improvement, what assumptions were wrong, what skills need to be developed. Execution reveals the truth. Without execution, it's easy to believe that you're making progress. You can spend hours researching, planning, hours organizing, preparing, and all of that activity can feel productive. But if execution asks much more, it asks an uncomfortable question. What have you really done? What have you actually built? What are you actually improving? What did you actually complete? Those questions matter because completed actions create evidence. Evidence creates confidence. Confidence builds on evidence far stronger than confidence built on motivation. This is why execution becomes a force multiplier inside the skill stack. Execution improves communication. Execution improves learning. Execution improves problem solving. Because every completed action creates new information, and that information helps the entire system grow stronger. So ask yourself honestly, how many goals in your life are currently waiting for action instead of information? Because if the answer is more than a few, then execution may be the weakest part of your skill stack. And if execution is the bottleneck, no amount of additional knowledge will solve the problem. Only action will. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to improve everything at the same time. They decide to become more disciplined, knowledgeable, productive, focused, confident, organized, all at once. And because the target becomes too large, they make very little progress. Builders approach improvement differently. They look for the bottleneck, the one capability that is limiting everything else. Imagine a race car with 3 perfect tires and 1 flat one. The problem is the weak point. Human capability works the same way. Most people are not failing because they lack 10 different skills. They're struggling because one weakness is quietly limiting the entire system. For some people, that weakness is communication. They have good ideas, but cannot express them clearly. For others, it's learning. They consume information constantly, but rarely apply it. For others, it's emotional regulation. The moment pressure appears, performance disappears. For others, it is execution. They know exactly what they should be doing, but rarely follow through it consistently. And for others, it's problem solving. They become overwhelmed whenever obstacles appear instead of learning how to work their way through them. This is why skill stacking becomes very quickly, noticeably, honest. It's not with your confidence. It's not with motivation. It's honesty. Ask yourself, which of these 5 capabilities is currently limiting your growth the most? Is it communication, learning, problem solving, emotional regulation, execution? Do not answer based on potential. Answer based on behavior, because behavior tells the truth. And once you identify the bottleneck, everything changes. You no longer need to improve everything. You simply need to improve the thing that is limiting everything else. That is how skill stacking works. Not through dramatic transformation, through deliberate strengthening of the weakest part of the system. And over time, as each capability improves, the entire stack becomes stronger. The result is not just one more skill. The result is more adaptability, more resilience, more usefulness, and ultimately, more value. The future will not belong exclusively to the people who possess the most information. Information is becoming increasingly abundant. Every year, knowledge becomes easier to access. Tools become easier to access. Technology becomes easier to access. The advantage is no longer simply knowing about something. The advantage is becoming someone who can consistently turn knowledge into capability. And that is why skill stacking matters. Because skill stacking is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming adaptable, about becoming useful, about becoming capable of continuing to grow, regardless of how the world changes around you. The people who remain valuable over the long term are rarely the people who stop learning, or stop adapting, or the ones who depend entirely on a single strength. The ones who become valuable continue to develop themselves. They continue strengthening weaknesses. They continue building their capability. And over time, that creates a level of resilience that isolated skills cannot provide. So here is your action for the next 24 hours. Take out a piece of paper. Write down these 5 capabilities: communication, learning, problem solving, emotional regulation, execution. Now score yourself from 1 to 10 in each category, not based on potential, not based on intention. Be honest, based on demonstrated behavior. Then circle the lowest score. That score represents the weakest part of your current skill stack. For the next 7 days, spend 15 minutes a day, each day, deliberately improving that capability. If communication is weakest, work on communication. If learning is weakest, focus on applying information instead of just consuming it. If emotional regulation is weakest, begin paying attention to how you respond under pressure. If execution is weakest, focus on daily follow-through. Do not try to improve everything. Improve the bottleneck. Because strengthening the weakest part of the system strengthens the entire system. And that is how highly capable people are built. Not through sudden transformation, through deliberate improvement repeated over time. If you are wanting to stay relevant in a world where information is becoming universal, technology is becoming increasingly powerful, and change is becoming increasingly common, then focus less on becoming exceptional at one thing and more on becoming capable across many things. Build a skill stack that becomes stronger every year, because the future belongs to people who can continue adapting. To do that, subscribe. This is DB Lewis, and I will see you on the next one.